I'd like to welcome you to this Improvement Service session on measuring social value in Scottish local authorities. This is the first in a series of webinars on different aspects of evaluation that we'll be delivering over the next 6 months or so. And today, we'll be hearing from our Evaluation Programme Manager, Karen Carrick, as well as Craig Mason from Dundee City Council, Robert McGregor from Fife Council, and Jake Dugdrin from Perth and Kinross Council. We'll then take questions and comments before Karen will talk a little bit about how the Improvement Service can help before we wrap up with some feedback from you on today's session and what you can look forward to in the rest of this webinar series. So, I'm John Mitchell from the evaluation team, and I want to introduce us by giving you a little background about what the Improvement Service is. The Improvement Service delivers a range of national improvement programmes for local government in Scotland. It develops capability and capacity and provides research and evaluation services, as well as national shared service applications and technology platforms. We have programmes spanning a wide range of policy and service delivery areas and work closely with our strategic partners to support transformation and change in local government. This includes initiatives such as the Local Government Transformation Programme led by Solace. So, to get us started, we'd like to know a little bit about what you want to get out of today's session. Now, you can click on the link in the chat or go to menti.com and use the codes on the screen. And it will take a minute or two to get your views there. And I'm just going to switch to a Menti view if you bear with me. So we've got a few comments coming in. Some people want to learn from other local authorities' good practice, find out about practical approaches to planning, conducting SROIs, find out a bit more about social value, learn about social value, hear about innovative approaches to local authorities using to measure social value impacts, practical measures, learning more about monitoring and evaluation projects and programmes, hearing about ideas to measure the social value of my projects, informing climate policy, assessing qualitative outcomes, establishing methodologies, sharing good practice, social value and community benefits, understanding social value. So there's quite a lot, obviously, about learning about social value and understanding it, hearing about case studies, learning from others, measuring the evidence of impacts, hearing of best practice, and understanding where others are struggling to unlock social value and plans to do better. That's great. Thank you very much for those comments. I'd now like to introduce the Evaluation Programme Manager for the Improvement Service, Karen Carrick, who's going to talk about the Improvement Service's approach to social value. Karen.
Thanks very much, John. So essentially what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what the Improvement Service is doing in relation to social value and why we prefer a particular methodology, social return on investment. And then I'll hand over to my colleagues and local authorities we've been working with, and they'll talk in a bit more detail about their experience of looking at social value in their partnership with the Improvement Service. Next slide, please, John. So I know this slide is a bit mind-blowing, there's an awful lot of text on it, but I think it helps if from the outset we all have a shared understanding of what we mean by social value, because it can mean different things to different people. What I've put up here is 3 definitions of social value, one from the Institute for Social Value, of which I'm a member, and I also assess social value reports. Another from Public Health Wales, just to give a kind of health dimension, and one from the Scottish Government. You'll notice that the one from the Scottish Government is probably a slightly earlier definition when the thinking around social value was to use it for commissioning services and to demonstrate that when you were putting services out to tender, social value was considered in some shape or form. But things have slightly moved on from that since the Public Services Social Value Act, which is 13 years old now. But what they all have in common is that social value looks at the social, economic, and environmental impacts of activities that are undertaken, that there's a focus on outcomes and impact rather than outputs and activities. So what's changed rather than what are you doing to deliver that? So there is that desire to make the connection between what your activities are, what services you're delivering, and what's changing for people, what outcomes they're experiencing. But there's also reference to a wider value beyond just money. Now, talking in the language of money or in financial terms is important because it's something that everybody understands and it also has a lot of traction. But we do have to think about value in a wider sense than just pounds, shillings and pence or euros. Next slide, please, John. So as I've said, we have done quite a lot of work on social return on investment. Social return on investment, it can be quite a complicated process, but it is a process, and it does cover off on these different elements, on the social, the economic, and the environmental outcomes. It looks at that bigger picture, and it also enables you to put a financial value on the changes that have been experienced by the beneficiaries or the stakeholders who've taken part in projects or who've been able to access particular services. So that's the definition, and that's from social value. We've got that. Next slide, please, John. So I'm not going to go into this in detail, and this is really just a very quick run through of what the steps are in carrying out a social return on investment analysis, because I know that in the Mentimeter, some people were interested in what we did in relation to this. So the first and most crucial thing is to agree the scope of the evaluation or analysis, and that really is vital because that will determine what you're going to consider and what you're not going to consider. When people start to talk about evaluating things, there is a tendency to get a wee bit carried away and to want to include all sorts of things in the evaluation process. But if you've got a scope that says we are going to evaluate the impact of delivering X, then that's a good starting point, and it then keeps everybody focused on what it is, what is the purpose of the evaluation. What we have been doing increasingly is drafting a logic model as a starting point, and we use this as a very simple one-page logic model that sets out what are the inputs, what are the activities, what are the outputs, and what are the outcomes on a short, medium, and long-term basis. And that links back to the scope. What we also consider are other factors that might influence what's going on. It's really helpful because it does clarify, what outcomes you are trying to achieve and link them to the scope. And it is on one page, so it's a very simple diagrammatic exercise. It's a good starting point. It's definitely not the end point, but it gets everybody to have a shared understanding of what outcomes you're seeking to achieve and for whom. A logic model won't tell you how you're going to measure them, what data you need to collect. But as I've said, it helps inform that shared understanding. In a social return investment analysis, we also do desktop research because we want to look at, well, is there evidence that the outcomes that are predicted to be achieved by this activity are likely to be achieved? And to do that, we tend to look at desktop research and see what evidence is out there of the effectiveness of particular activities or some of the background reading. And I think that helps you in developing the approach, and it also ensures that you're not duplicating what's already been evidenced. The next stage is that we identify and engage with stakeholders to confirm outcomes. And we do that in two stages. There's what's called the qualitative phase, and that's where you have to speak to people to identify what changes for them. So we have to focus on the stakeholders who are likely to experience the greatest change, because potentially in any kind of service or activity, there's loads of stakeholders. So it's important to focus in on the ones that are most relevant and the ones that are most likely to experience change. And really, you need to talk to them to confirm the outcomes, because we all have our own ideas about what outcomes are likely to be achieved. But often it's only when you speak to the stakeholders who are actually achieving them that you discover that perhaps they're not as important as we thought they were, or indeed that there's other ones. After we've done that, further down the process, what we've got to do is identify the numbers of individuals or stakeholders who are likely to experience these outcomes. And we call that the quantitative phase of the analysis. We often do that through a survey, but what essentially we're trying to do with that is we've identified the outcomes. Okay, so how many people who have accessed this activity or service are likely to actually achieve these outcomes? And it will vary. Before that process, what we also have to do is think about, well, how are we going to measure it? How are we going to know the outcomes have achieved? And what data do we need to do to collect that? Obviously, social return on investment puts a financial value, a financial proxy on changes. So we need to identify financial proxies. And there are some databases out there that we can use, and there are well-established financial proxies. Talk more about this later. But Manchester City Council have done quite a lot of work on identifying potential financial proxies that relate to cost savings for local authorities that are quite interesting. We also have to consider other factors and assess their importance. And by that, what I mean is, well, okay, so this stakeholder has achieved this outcome, but what would have happened anyway? Because it might be that they would have got that change without the activity or service. And has anything else contributed to it? So these kind of factors, this consideration of impact needs to be addressed too. We also need to assess how important or any assumptions are that we've made. So as part of a social return on investment analysis, we'll do what's called the sensitivity analysis. And this is where we consider things that we've made assumptions about and test how important they are and what impact they have on the ratio, which for many people is the most important aspect of a social return on investment analysis. I would say it's not. I think what's more important is identifying the importance of changes or outcomes to individual stakeholders. We will produce a report that contains the ratio, and it also makes recommendations for any further actions that may be helpful. Social return on investment analysis can help you producing a framework for future evaluations, and it helps you to identify outcomes and potential methods of collecting data that you can use to evidence that those outcomes have been achieved. So that's a very quick run through of social return on investment analysis. It's much more detailed than that, but that gives you a flavour of the kind of processes that we use to do one. Next slide, please, John. So why social return on investment? There are benefits to it. It is a clear and consistent process. It's a bit like when you sit an exam and you've got to explain your workings. So in the social return on investment analysis, there will be an explanation as to any assumptions that have been made. There will be a clear process that's been followed through for all the stages. So there is that rigor and that consistency that's really important. It's also stakeholder informed. So there is a requirement to go out and consult with stakeholders in various ways. It depends on the analysis you're doing. It depends on the stakeholders that you want to engage with. But there needs to be some way of at least ensuring that the views of stakeholders have been captured either directly or through the use of proxies or through the use of other evidence. There's a focus on measuring and monetizing outcomes. So it's very much about what has changed. So it's less relevance to activities and outputs. Though what I would say is sometimes starting the process can be quite useful, because on a few occasions it's been discovered that, well, the activities that are being delivered are not really going to realise the outcomes that it's hoped that they will. And that has become clear as discussions have taken place. It also looks at the wider impacts, and we all want to talk about impact, but again, That's quite a difficult concept sometimes to explain when social return on investment does that. It looks at all the elements that make up impact, and it looks at short, long, and medium-term outcomes. And finally, it gives that ratio of investment to benefits. Now, I've put there as a range because social return on investment is not a precise process. As I've already said, assumptions are made. So it's important that when you're testing your assumptions and the impact that they have on your ratio, you present your ratio as a range. So it could be for every pound invested, you will get benefits of between £3 and £5. That's much more accurate than saying you'll get benefits of £4.15, because there isn't that degree of rigour in the actual process. Next slide, please, John. So there's some examples of work carried out by the EIS here. We have completed an impact report for Ms. and Mrs., a social enterprise in Glasgow, which was about empowering women. It's not available on our website, but if you contact Ms. and Miss, you can access the data from them. That was not a social return investment analysis. It was more of an impact report, and we can do both. There are some other ones here that are available on our website, so I won't go into any detail on them. If you want to look on our website, you've got any questions, please feel free to get back to us. We're also using the process internally to look at some of the services that we provide, and we have done a social value analysis of My Account and Protecting People services in the IS, and we're working on others as well, because we see the value of this and we want to apply it to our own work. We are currently working on Capital City Partnerships Intensive Family Support Service, which covers 6 projects, and that work is ongoing. When we've produced the report, I'm sure we'll have a webinar on that and we'll share the findings. We're looking at advice in accessible settings in Dundee. By that I mean GP practices and schools. And we're looking at Glasgow Food System Development Fund as well. So it shows you how you can use social return on investment for a range of activities and functions. And it can be large projects and smaller projects too. I'm not going to talk about some of the current work because I know the other colleagues who are on the call will share their findings and their perceptions of the approach with you. Next slide, please, John. So the challenges of social value, because it can be quite complicated, it can be quite challenging, but it is very worthwhile. The first one is to select the most appropriate evaluation methodology. And to do that, social return investment may not be for you, but there are other options. There are other ways that you can look at social value. So it's thinking about, well, what am I doing? What is the best evaluation approach that I should be taking? And that will depend on the size and scale of what you're doing. It will depend on the data you have available. It will depend on the time and resources that you have as well. There are a lot of tools out there, and it's a case of identifying and accessing useful tools. And we can share some of the tools that we use and some of the measures that we use with you. That's, afterwards, we'll share a list of useful websites and useful tools. Also, one of the challenges is the language, because we all describe things in different terms. So in any kind of evaluation, not just a social value one, it is important that everybody is speaking the same language. And I cannot stress that enough, that scope and language are critical starting points, or the evaluation will be doomed to failure, because everybody will be doing different things. I know within local authorities there's a lack of recognition of the value of research and evaluation. And one of my colleagues in the Improvement Service did a survey of local authorities to see if they had research and evaluation staff units, and not many do. So there is that, we want to do it. We can see the value of it, but we don't always recognise that needs resources and support to actually achieve those evaluations. There is also a lack of, in social return investment, lack of availability of free financial proxies. There's a whole industry around this now, and there are lots of organisations and companies out there who will sell you access to free financial proxies. About 5 years ago, Social Value UK used to have a big database with potential financial proxies that you could use, but that's still under development as far as I know. One of the things that we were keen to do is for people who did perhaps want to put financial proxies or monetize outcomes to see if we could build or develop a database for local authorities that was free to use. And we're working with Perth and Kinross Council to start to address this. It is quite a complicated process, but what the theory behind it is that what we wanted to do is to pick 3 service areas, then look at, well, what are the most important outcomes in those service areas? How are they currently measured? What data is available? How can we put a financial value on them? What potential proxies could we use? The 3 areas that we talked about were climate change, employability, and green space. And I know that Jacob will talk more about that. It's also a challenge to have a proportionate approach, to be realistic about what is achieved and what's not. There's nothing wrong in just not going for a full-blown SRI, but just thinking about, well, how can I have some elements of social value in the evaluation that I'm doing? And a little bit of social value is better than no social value at all. And the final point I would make on this is knowing when to stop, because there are some things that we do know the value of. I used to work for Green Space Scotland, and we did a lot of work on the value of health walks. Now, we don't really need to value health walks anymore because there's a multitude of data out there. We know the evidence of it, so we can take it as a given that we know that works. So we don't really need to keep evaluating things that we know that there is a solution for. That's really all from me at this stage, and I'll now hand back to John, who will pass on to colleagues from councils.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Hopefully that set the scene for everyone. Our first local authority presenter is Craig Mason. Now, unfortunately, Craig can't be with us today. He's on leave, but he's kindly given a short video that's we'll just play now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Craig Mason, and I'm currently the Senior Manager for Council Advice Services at Dundee City Council. I've been asked this morning to give a little bit of an overview of what social return on investment means for me as a service manager of an advice service within a local authority. Just a wee bit of background, I've worked in welfare rights for over 30 years now, as a welfare rights officer initially, then as a team manager, and latterly for the last 8 or 9 years as a service manager, a senior manager. So essentially, the definition of a social return on investment, and you have to excuse me because I am not a current academic and I'm not a researcher by trade, and I have to read the definition. Social return on investment, a framework for measuring and accounting for value. It seeks to reduce inequality and environmental degradation and improve well-being by incorporating social, environmental and economic costs and benefits. So I have to go back to that every so often just to remind myself of the actual definition from an academic point of view. But what does it mean for me as a welfare rights manager? Well, over the years, over the 30 odd years that I've worked in welfare rights and money advice, I've always suspected that although we account for the amount of money that we raise for individual people and individual households, the difference that we were making was more than just purely financial. We could see that, you know, a benefit decision would mean the world to an individual or a family. An overpayment being written off would take away the burden that maybe hung over the heads of that family. Through representation at tribunal, we would have that overpayment decision overturned. So I knew that, you know, it was well beyond just the physical cash that households would get. The difference that we were making was beyond that physical cash. And social return on investment kind of gave us the opportunity to kind of prove the impact of the work that we do. The first time I came in contact with the Improvement Service was back in 2015. I knew about them prior to that through contact with other folk within the council. But Karen and her team were part of an initial small coterie of people who were looking at the impact that having welfare rights advisors co-located within GP practice, what that meant and what difference that made compared to the kind of traditional setups of welfare rights advice. And as a way to demonstrate what that extra added value was, the social return on investment framework was used. So essentially what they did was they get stakeholders together. So the families at the centre of it, the individuals at the centre of it who are receiving advice are a key part, obviously. But then it's also about the other stakeholders, the advisors who work within general practice, the GPs, the health professionals, even the reception staff, how it adds value to their roles within primary care. And then also the advisors themselves and what it means for them having a much more efficient service to offer people, where individuals can go to a trusted location, i.e. their GP practice, and see someone in a confidential room without any stigma whatsoever, because the people in the waiting room don't know that you're being called in to see a welfare rights officer. You might be going in to see a physio or someone to take your bloods. So it was that kind of added value that we wanted to try and look at when the first social return on investment report was done on that work back in 2017. So essentially what it does is, from my point of view, I mentioned earlier on about the fact that, we were good as welfare rights teams at putting a figure, a leverage figure on how much we raised per household or per customer, or how much we raised over the course of an entire year. So last year in welfare rights and Connect and energy advice within Dundee City Council, my service helped raise over £17 million for the people of Dundee. And that's fantastic, brilliant. But that's purely the quantitative figure. What about the qualitative stuff? What about what I mentioned earlier about the impact it has, the outcomes for the individuals, how it makes them feel more confident and perhaps gives them a more robust future in terms of financial security? It might, as I mentioned, take away something that's been hanging over their head for some time and just to reduce the stress and the tension within households generally. And allow people to become more sociable, do more things with the money that we've managed to raise for them. The social return on investment looks at all of that, and it tries to do the qualitative stuff as well as the quantitative stuff. And that's where it really comes into its own, because it attaches a value to that additional stuff. And that is it proves the worth of the work that we're doing. And it was great, when we got a report from the Improvement Service in 2017. The social return on investment report demonstrated that our service raised up to £50 for every £1 spent in terms of health and well-being benefits for patients and stakeholders. So it's the impact not just on the patients, but everyone round about that particular patient or individual coming to the GP practice. And that is, in essence, why it's so much of a useful tool. We could go back to our councillors and report on this and explain that for every £1 spent on advice services in this particular model, we were getting £50 back in the kind of social well-being benefits to everyone involved in this new setup. Since then, we've just recently concluded a second updated social return on investment report with the Improvement Service, with Karen's team, which is looking at the GP surgeries again. And we're also just about concluding the impact of advice within secondary schools within Dundee. And again, we're getting great feedback from those who've been through the service, who have benefited from it, as well as the workers and various stakeholders, both within GP practice on the first one, and also within the secondary schools on the second one. So I can heartily recommend social return on investment as a means by which to showcase what your service achieves in terms of outcomes and impact, and long may Karen team continue to be doing the great work that they already do. Thanks very much.
That was really great to be able to hear from Craig there. I'd like to now introduce Robert McGregor from Fife Council, who's going to talk a little bit about social value in the context of energy advice.
Thanks, John. So I am just going to get my notes up. Hang on a second. So, as John said, my name's Robert McGregor. I'm a business change manager in Fife Council's housing service. And among other things, I lead on the council's response to fuel poverty. So in 2023, Cosy Kingdom, our third sector partners in relation to fuel poverty, commissioned the improvement service to evaluate the social return on investment for their energy advice service and for their handy service. Now, the handy service supplies and fits energy saving measures in residents' homes, so thermal curtains, door insulation, radiator panels, that sort of thing. From a council perspective, the study was very much welcomed, and as a principal funder for Cosy Kingdom, we agreed to meet the cost of that evaluation. We knew that the Cosy Kingdom service was potentially life-changing for clients, not only because it saved them a few pounds on their energy spend, but because of the impact it had on their well-being and their quality of life. And we knew that the energy advisors we were routinely in the homes of struggling families and able to speak to them about a wide range of other support beyond the energy help that they were able to give them, and how that support could be accessed. So we understood the extent of an energy advisor's reach, but we had no means to demonstrate that impact, hence the support for a social return on investment evaluation. Not unusually, we have a well-established monitoring regime in place for all our fuel poverty support activity. Inevitably, the default is to count the number of things we do and the amount of money we spend delivering projects. We monitor and report how many home energy advice visits we undertake, how many fuel vouchers we provide, how many energy saving measures are installed, how many boilers we repair, and it goes on and on. But essentially, this is just counting widgets. What it tells us is that we're busy. What we need to know is what difference the services that we commission actually make to the people that receive them. How does it actually change their lives? We want to know whether the kids can be kept warm at home, whether everyone can eat, that older people aren't anxious about whether they can put money on their meters. And in addition, it was getting harder to make the case for ongoing and heightened funding for those services given budget constraints. We had to get better at explaining the impact of investment to decision makers, and therefore what the consequences would be if we did not sustain that funding commitment. It would also be useful to demonstrate that services didn't only help hard-pressed households save money, important as that is, but that also they supported the Council's wider social, environmental and health ambitions. The study engaged a range of stakeholders, including beneficiaries of support, to consider those social impacts. The headlines from the study were that for every pound invested in the service, there was a generation of £34 of benefits. So a ratio of £1 invested to £34 of benefits. That the service contributed towards improved health and well-being for individuals as a result of living in warmer homes and being less stressed about energy costs. It enabled individuals to have increased awareness, understanding and confidence to manage how they use energy more effectively. More powerfully are the testimonies that the evaluation gathered from Cosy Kingdom clients. So I'm going to read out just a few quotes. Firstly, I didn't know where to turn and I couldn't sleep for worrying about the gas bill, but I needed to keep the heating on for my mum with her COPD. Cozy Kingdom sat down with me and explained all the help I could get. And another, the bedroom was so cold and damp I couldn't sleep in it. All I had was a bed and I was too scared to put the heating on. Getting that grant and the curtains and the extra money meant I could stop sleeping on the sofa. And a last one, the advisor told me about the community meals, so I went along. I also got a voucher for a food bank. So that one demonstrates that energy advisors are doing more than just providing energy advice. So what has happened was, as a result of the study that the Improvement Service have done for us? First of all, the energy service has been fully sustained. So the funding we were after was put in place, and the service as it was is there. We've also been able to invest in a project to build the capacity of other frontline workers to give energy advice, training 900 staff in social work, health and social care, in housing and other community-based services. So that's about recognising the importance of energy advice and how it can be a trigger for improving people's lives. Also, we've supported the recruitment of additional handy service workers. So we understood the value of the handy service approach through the work. And from that, we're able to make convincing arguments in the case for an additional resource. And finally, elected members have been more content that we're demonstrating value for money. That's quite a key point, because when you put money into third sector organisations or other partners, councillors can be very keen to scrutinise, and rightly so, the value they get from that money. This study has actually helped to reassure those elected members that the support we were getting from those partners was well worth the funding they were agreeing to put in. To finish, I'd want to say that the work has helpfully provoked wider discussion in the Council of how we do more to understand the full impacts of projects and programmes. So this kind of work is rapidly becoming more than a nice to do. It's becoming an expectation. So the sense that it's no longer enough just to count things, but we need to do more to actually show that impact. And we're now trying to do that across the range of the different programmes that we have in place. Thank you. Thanks, John.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. We'd like to move on now to our last presenter, Jacob Dudgeon from Perth and Kinross Council, who I believe may also be joined by his colleague, Sam Rankin. So Jacob, I think it's over to you.
Grand, thanks, John. Hello, everyone. As John said, my name's Jacob Dudgeon. I work within Perth and Kinross Council in the strategic planning, performance and risk team. We have been looking at social value for over the past year. It sort of became an ask from our executive leadership team to look into it around October 2024 now. And my team leader actually contacted the Improvement Service for guidance and advice on it, which started this relationship. Karen sort of teed up the work that we have been doing with the Improvement Service in trialling financial proxies and building a database that other local authorities can use. We've heard already in the past hour from other councils about their projects that are I would say more fully fleshed, so this is a sort of different perspective of our development project. As Karen mentioned in her presentation, we're looking at 3 specific public-facing services within the council to help build this trial and development. That is employability, community green space and open spaces, and climate change. We have faced some challenges based on the availability of data and then measuring that data along with the financial and social impact. We had a catch up just early last week where we went through the services that we decided on and sort of were able to evaluate the progress made. Firstly, with employability, we have a well-established database, I think, across Scotland of indicators and outcomes that are measured to evaluate employability. So we believe that will be quite a straightforward one to start with first, in terms of building those financial proxies and building measuring the impact of people's change within employability programs. Have they gained confidence? Have they gained extra skills? What does that mean in terms of the investment that we as a council put onto those employability programs? For community green space, we are looking at the uses and the impact of that use, whether local people use it for a walk or a run or simply as a social gathering or sports activity. All of those will have different impacts that will have various investment impacts as well. In terms of the data, it is somewhat established, but it is vast depending on the scale of green space we have in each local authority. As I'm sure you'll all be aware, Perth and Kinross is vast in terms of its green space and rural land. So we are working out how to gather that information effectively, be it through local groups that help maintain the parks or local development trusts, whether they could reach out to the people who use it, and then that can help us build the database to build the financial proxies on. Lastly, probably more pertinently, is climate change, which is definitely a priority within each local authority, but is probably newer in terms of its indicator base and the reporting processes of climate change emissions within local authorities and other indicators. So we've agreed that one will take the most amount of work to really build on what are we actually going to look at in terms of, is it going to be emissions, and how the investment we put into climate change can help reduce emissions, and what does that investment mean? Essentially, we're hoping that the social return on investment will help elected members understand the impact of each public pound that they allocate to services across the council. We have heard in committees recently about elected members looking for that extra bit of understanding of how we as a council put value on the work that we do. So this work has come at a great time. Yeah, and I think that I hopefully gives a rough overview of where we are. I'm happy. I've got Sam Rankin, my colleague, who's also assisting me on our side with this work. But in terms of the process, it has been Karen and George who have gratefully been looking at the inner processes of working all this out. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to jump in the Q&A.
That's great, Jacob. Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, I think if we'll just move on next, Karen, I think you're going to talk a little bit about how the IS can help.
As you know, the IS is there to support local authorities and community planning partners. There are various ways in which we can work with local authorities. As you've seen, we can do so on a commissioned basis if you want a full-blown SRI. We also, if there's an interesting piece of work that we think might have traction across all Scottish local authorities, then we're quite happy to work with you on that, as we're currently doing with Perth and Kinross. If you are thinking about how best to evaluate a project, then we can act as a critical friend and talk about what might or might not be possible. I suppose what I'm saying is that we can and will help in whatever way we can, but to do that you need to contact us. So if you want to have a discussion about support from the evaluation team within the IS, then please get in touch. You've had some examples of work that we've done. We do other stuff as well that we've not been able to share today, but please feel free to get in touch, and our contact details will be up at the end of this session.
We'd also like you to provide a little bit of other feedback. It wouldn't be an evaluation session without asking for some of that. And this is a very short feedback form. It'd be really appreciated if you could fill this in, as it will help inform our future sessions. And with that in mind, we'll share some of our contact details with you there. There's also a link to our website and a little bit about our evaluation offer that we provide. And to finish up, lastly, I would just like to thank you for coming along today, and to our speakers, Karen, Craig, Robert, Jacob, for their insights into measuring social value in Scottish local authorities. And now, if you're interested in the rest of this webinar series, please follow our Eventbrite page, where we'll be posting further details. The next event coming up on the 4th of November is already available to book. We hope you can join us for that one, and some of the future ones as well. That would be most appreciated. So do take care, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.